So, Yom Kippur on the horizon. Let's consider. I have a question. Why do people come to Shul, especially on Yom Kippur? To be sure, I don't really care why people come to Shul as long as they come. As long as they come, they connect, and they identify in whichever sort of way. That works for me. I mean, I meet people all the time who say to me somewhat sheepishly, prefacing their remarks with, I know I don't attend Shul often, but, and I always interject, it's fine. To be honest, if I wasn't the rabbi, I wouldn't necessarily be there too often either. But when I thought about it some more, I've come to realize that essentially there are two types of shulgoers. There are what you might call episode shulgoers, and there are what you might call continuum shulgoers. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. When you think about old television, the golden age of TV, it was always the case that every episode was a standalone. What you watched today was completely disconnected from tomorrow. Don't know if you remember way back when the Roadrunner cartoon, the way it worked was always, today the coyote would get caught in some explosion or fall off the edge of a cliff when in pursuit of the Roadrunner. The episode would end with a victorious Roadrunner going beep, beep, and then you'd switch on again tomorrow, a miracle of miracles. The coyote would be fine, back in action. Every episode was a standalone. Today had nothing to do with yesterday or tomorrow. These days, however, most shows you watch begin with previously on, because what happened previously is inextricably linked to what's happening now. You won't know what's happening in episode 2 if you've missed episode 1. So you have the modern day phenomenon of binge watching. Even as you may be catching up on 36 episodes spanning 3 series, what it is essentially like watching one long show. So we have those two scenarios, and the same reality applies when it comes to Jews as well. You have what you might call continuum Jews, those who come to Shul frequently. They're involved in community life regularly. They're spiritually motivated, and they're there morning, evening, day in, day out, week in, week out. They are continuum Jews. And then we have episode shulgoers, which, let's be frank, makes up most of the Jewish population that surface on the high holidays, maybe a yahrzeit, and definitely a family simcha. Each experience is a standalone. And you know what? In the scheme of things, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we all come at one point or another. What matters is that we all connect in one form or another. What matters is that we all engage in one way or another. I remember a couple of years ago, somebody commented to me about people sitting behind them in Shul, talking about their golf handicap. And he said to me, could you imagine they come into Shul on Rosh Hashanah, the only time of the year that they're here, and they're talking golf. Do you know what I said? Can you imagine? Even as they want to talk golf, they come into Shul to talk about it rather than spend the day on the golf course playing it or being on the golf course talking about Shul. And the bottom line is this: Jews identify for a myriad of reasons. In the past, it was about religion. You identified as a Jew by your willingness to submit to the dictates and the mandates of our faith. In later years, it became a lot more about culture. The gefilte fish on Friday night, the matzah balls on Seder night. For others, it was limited to the liberal and fine arts. And frankly, in the post-Holocaust era, for many, Jewish identity is exclusively about Zionism in Israel. And today, as the Western world becomes more and more focused on finding the perfect niche for every single person and personalizing everything from laptops to lattes, many Jews are also customizing their investment in Judaism, coming up with all kinds of communities for everything: Jewish vegans, Jewish pacifists, organizations like Kvetchy Kids and Jewish Parents in Search of Nachas. We have all been influenced by our own narrative, our own experiences, our own outlooks, and our own lifestyle. But the bottom line remains, and this is what Yom Kippur emphasizes: every Jew is valued. Every Jew counts. Every Jew is a diamond. Some shine on the surface. Some require some mining and polishing to reveal the facets and glow, but their value remains the same. So whether you come indoors into shul or you remain outdoors, I don't know, in security or whatever, regardless of your active affiliation or none, this is your home. Whatever your niche, it's not how you identify, but that you identify. And that identity then has to be the catalyst which prompts you in your own way to do your bit as a Jew to make the world a better place. Apparently, a true story, two friends pulled a really big prank in their school and were expelled as a result. Years later, one went on to become a successful businessman. The other never amounted to much and often found himself in trouble with the law. And at an alumni reunion years later, the principal of that year commented to the successful businessman, "I'm always intrigued how you made such a success of your life when your friend never did." And the former student replied, when he came home, his father berated him, telling him how bad he was for what he did, what a fool he was for squandering his life, how that kind of behavior will leave him remaining a nobody. When I came home, my father told me about the vast potential I have, how I can be so much more, how such behavior does not become me. And you know what? I believed him, as a result of which I believed in myself. And I never did anything like that again. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to appreciate our inherent value. What is our inherent value? It lies in the measure of our soul. There's a very curious story that is told in the Talmud about the great rabbi who was once traveling along, returning from a study session, when he passed a rather homely looking individual. And looking at him, the rabbi remarked and said, "How ugly is this man?" And the man, upon hearing this insult, turned to the rabbi and replied, "You don't like the way I look? Go back to the craftsman who formed me." In other words, you don't like the way I look? Take it up with the manufacturer. And the rabbi felt an immediate sense of remorse and followed the man for miles, begging his forgiveness. Now, at face value, it's a curious story of one person seemingly utterly superficial and, I don't know, just being cruel in the way that he was reflecting on another individual. But there's really much more going on. The rabbi was holy. The rabbi was pious. The rabbi, the Talmud tells us, was on his way from his study session. Indeed, the rabbi wasn't reflecting on the man's external appearance. He was looking beneath the surface, and he didn't like what he saw. The man that stood before him was void and null of any spirituality. How ugly is this man? This rabbi was a great and lofty man, a continuum Jew, if you will. Prayer and study were part of his staple spiritual diet. The man he encountered was nothing of the sort. He was an episode Jew. But the man retorts, "Go to the craftsman who formed me." By definition, episode or continuum, we're both part of the same show. We both come from the same God. We both pray under the same roof. The same craftsman who formed you formed me as well. I'm just like you. So regardless of what sort of Jew we identify as, these high holidays and Yom Kippur calls upon us in particular to rise to the challenge incumbent upon every Jew. Rosh Hashanah is the day that man was first brought into being. In the time-hallowed words of our sages, man was created alone, singular, because he is obligated to say, "For me was this world created." Every single one of us has to believe in ourselves and believe that this world was created for me. And therefore, I must assume the mantle of leadership and make a difference in my slice of the world that will positively affect mankind. And that's something that we have to think about and reflect upon, particularly over the course of the 25 hours of Yom Kippur. We have to assume that mantle of leadership. What does it mean to be a leader? Leaders are more than mere visionaries who talk about their dreams. They act upon them, and they constantly demonstrate by way of example. They have more backbone than wishbone. Leaders are what leaders do. Leaders don't pull, rather leaders don't push, they pull. They don't enforce, they inspire. Leaders lead, which implies a destination, someplace to be that isn't here. They attract followers by flashing a light ahead. They never accept the status quo. During these days, we are all called upon to be leaders, each in our own right, whether within our personal lives, whether within our family lives, or indeed in our work life and our community life. There were these two warring tribes in the Andes, one that lived in the lowlands and the other in the high mountains. The mountain people invaded the lowlanders one day, and while plundering their people, they kidnapped a little baby boy. They took him with them back up the mountain. The lowlanders didn't know how to climb the mountain. They didn't know the trails or how to track in the steep terrain. Even so, they sent out their best party of able-bodied men to climb the mountain and bring the baby home. They tried one method after another, one trail then another, for several days and nights, but it was to no avail. Feeling hopeless and helpless, the lowlander men decided that it was a lost cause, and they started to return to their village below. And as they start heading back, they see the baby's mother walking towards them, and they realize she's coming down the mountain that they hadn't figured out how to climb. And then they saw she had the baby strapped to her back. How could that be? They approached her. We, the strongest and most skilled men of the village, couldn't climb the mountain. How did you manage to do so? The woman shrugged her shoulders and said simply, "It wasn't your baby." And I love this anecdote because it gently inspires how to be a leader. The lowlanders, they're great men, they're determined men, they're committed to the cause, and they set out on their trek, but they're not leaders. If they were, they would have got the job done. A leader is someone who sees every person they are entrusted to lead as their baby. And like any parent who would risk life and limb for their baby, a leader does the same. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. The ancient rabbis tell us when the battle with Amalek, the Amalekites, was fought, Moses sat on a rock with his hands up in the air. And the Talmud tells us that whenever Moses' hands were raised in the air, the Jewish people were being victorious over the enemy. When he put his hands down, they would lose. And the Talmud then asks, what, so he had magic hands? And they explain, no, when Moses' hands were raised in the air, the Jewish nation were reminded of where their true salvation comes. They'd look to the raised hands, and by extension, they'd look beyond towards the heavens and know that their fate is in the hands of above. When they maintained that consciousness and awareness, they prevailed. In 1875, there was an amateur archaeologist in Spain known as Marcelino de Satuala. He owned land which had some caves, and as a hobby, he'd spend every weekend excavating. For 4 years, he'd go into those caves. Until one particular weekend, he took his 9-year-old daughter, Maria, in with him. And it wasn't long when at a certain point, she suddenly looked, "Papa, what are those animals on the ceiling?" As it turned out, this Altamira cave contained the first ever prehistoric paintings of bison on the ceiling of the cave. 4 years, he's going in and out each weekend, and he never noticed. You know why? Because he never looked up. We engage in all sorts of battles, and no more so than now, internal struggles of varied sorts, etc. Keep your hands down. If you keep looking down, if you keep feeling down, that's not leadership. You're just going to wander in the darkness of your life. But if you look up, that's how you win battles. That's where you experience light. That's where you discover treasure. During these days, we need to think about this. We need to take time out from our tumultuous lifestyle. We need to recalibrate our thinking. We need to consider our priorities. What is really important in life? We need to determine how in the coming year we can all take some moments of spiritual respite from our otherwise tumultuous workload in life to think beyond the confines of our own limitations, of our material pursuits, and of our next conquests. So maybe the trek of life is challenging. Maybe the journey right now for some is overwhelming, but it's all about looking up, realizing that as long as I do what I have to do, God will take care of and do what he has to do as well. And thus we say, and we look to our Father in heaven, and we say, Avinu Malkeinu Chanenu Vanenu. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed. Do with us kindness, compassion. Be charitable and benevolent towards us, and bring us salvation. And so as we embark on this journey into a new year, we have to recognize, number one, that we're all valuable. Number two, that humanity needs our individual services. Number three, to know our value and to serve humanity to the very best of our personal ability. Engage any which way you can, identify any which way you can, grow any which way you need. And in turn, God will surely give us the health and the wealth that we need to be able to engage, the wisdom and the judgment that we require to determine how to identify, and all the strength and all the stamina we can muster to be able to grow. We should all merit a truly happy, healthy, and prosperous new year, filled with tremendous blessing and success in everything, a year in which we will value who we are, we will cherish what we are, and we will believe in our ability to make a difference, a year in which we will experience harmony and tranquility as we are sealed in the book of life, love, laughter, and lasting redemption. Wishing you all Shana,